The B-24 was employed in operations in every combat theater during World War II. Because of its great range, it was particularly suited for such missions as the famous raid from North Africa against the oil industry at Ploiești, Romania, on August 1st of 1943. This feature also made the airplane suitable for long-range overwater missions in the Pacific Theater. More than 18,000 Liberators were produced. The B-24 on display flew combat missions from North Africa in 1943 and 1944 with the 512th Bomb Squadron. It was flown to the museum in May of 1959. It is the same type airplane as the Lady Be Good, the world-famous B-24 that disappeared on a mission from North Africa in 1943 and was found in the Libyan desert in May of 1959. Armed with 10 50-caliber machine guns and 8,000 pounds of bombs, the four Pratt & Whitney R-1830s of 1,200 horsepower each gave it a maximum speed of 303 miles per hour. Cruising at 175 miles per hour, it had a range of 2,850 miles. The B-25 medium bomber was one of America's most famous airplanes of World War II. It was the type used by General Jimmy Doolittle for the Tokyo raid on April 18, 1942. Subsequently, B-25 saw duty in every combat area, being flown by the Dutch, British, Chinese, Russians, and Australians, in addition to the U.S. Air Forces. Although the airplane was originally intended for level bombing from medium altitudes, it was used extensively in the Pacific Theater for bombing Japanese airfields and beach emplacements from treetop level and for strafing and skip bombing enemy shipping. Built by North American Aviation, the B-25 first flew on August 19th of 1940, and the U.S. Army Air Corps accepted the first 5 B-25s in February of 1941. By the end of the war, North American Aviation had built a total of 8,816 B-25s at its California and Kansas plants. During its long career, the B-25 experienced a number of modifications. The first major change occurred with the G model that included a 75mm cannon and 2 fixed 50 caliber machine guns in the nose. The H model was the first to add 2 additional forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns and cheek blisters. In the J version, the most numerous variant, the aircraft returned to its original arrangement as a level bomber, reverting to a transparent nose that included 1 flexible and 2 fixed 50 caliber machine guns. Driven by requirements in the Pacific, however, field-modified Js and finally production versions once again featured a solid nose that housed 8 fixed 50 caliber machine guns for low-level attack. In this configuration, the J model could devastate vehicles and shipping with up to 14 forward-firing heavy machine guns. The airplane on display, actually an RB-25D, was removed from storage in Tucson, Arizona, and rebuilt by North American Aviation at Inglewood, California, to the configuration of the lead B-25B, flown by Lieutenant Doolittle on the Tokyo raid. It was then flown to the museum, arriving in April of 1958. Armed with 6 50 caliber machine guns and 3,000 pounds of bombs, the 2 Wright 2600 engines of 1,700 horsepower each gave it a maximum speed of 328 miles per hour. At a cruising speed of 233 miles per hour, it had a range of 2,500 miles with auxiliary tanks. Although the Marauder did not make its first flight until November 25, 1940, its design showed such promise that the Air Corps ordered 1,131 B-26s in September of 1940. The B-26 began flying combat missions in the Southwest Pacific in the spring of 1942, but most were subsequently assigned to Europe and the Mediterranean. Bombing from medium altitudes of 10 to 15,000 feet, the Marauder had the lowest loss rate of any Allied bomber, less than 0.5%. U.S., British, Free French, Australian, South African, and Canadian air crews all flew the B-26 in combat. By the end of World War II, B-26 crews had flown more than 110,000 sorties and dropped 150,000 tons of bombs. In 1945, when B-26 production was halted, 5,266 had been built. The Marauder on display was flown in combat by the Free French during the final months of World War II. It was obtained from the Air France Airlines Training School near Paris in June of 1965. It is painted as a 9th Air Force B-26 assigned to the 387th Bomb Group in 1945. Armed with 11 50 caliber machine guns and 4,000 pounds of bombs, The two Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines of 2,000 horsepower each gave it a maximum speed of 285 miles per hour. At a cruising speed of 190 miles per hour, it had a range of 1,100 miles. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress flew in every combat zone during World War II, but its most significant service was over Europe. Along with the B24 Liberator, the B-17 formed the backbone of the U.S. Army Air Force Strategic Bombing Force, and it helped win the war by crippling Germany's war industry. The B-17's design emphasized high-altitude flight, speed, and heavy defensive armament in order to survive enemy defenses. Advanced turbo-supercharged engines allowed it to fly up to 30,000 feet with a combat load, while powered turrets and flexible guns covered all areas around the aircraft. Although the B-17 prototype flew in 1935, only a relatively small number of B-17s were in service when the U.S. entered the war in 1941. Production quickly increased and three companies, Boeing, Lockheed Vega, and Douglas, mass-produced Flying Fortresses by the thousands. The B-17F was the fastest model and the primary bomber early in the strategic bombing campaign. The later B-17G had a nose turret for better frontal defense, and it was also the most numerous, representing about two-thirds of all B-17s made. By the end of production in 1945, more than 12,700 B-17s had been built. The aircraft on display, the famed B-17F Memphis Belle, became the first heavy bomber to return to the U.S. after flying 25 missions over Europe. The Memphis Belle, which had been on loan from the Air Force to the city of Memphis, was relocated to the museum in 2005. After years of meticulous restoration, it was placed on public display in May of 2018. With a crew of 10, it was armed with up to 13 50 caliber machine guns and 8,000 pounds of bombs. The four 1,200 horsepower Wright R1820-97 turbo supercharged radial engines gave it a maximum speed of 325 miles per hour with a range of 2,800 miles.